The sun was just beginning to push a pale line of light over the Wyoming foothills when the camp along Blacktail Deer Creek stirred awake. The water moved slow and cold through the grass, its surface broken only by drifting leaves and the occasional rise of a feeding trout. 28 prospectors, dusty, hungry, and worn thin from weeks of hard travel, rose from their blankets with stiff backs and swollen feet. Their coffee boiled over a small fire, the smoke twisting into the chilled air. These men had crossed the plains chasing rumors of a new strike in Montana, convinced that one more gamble might finally turn their luck. But the shortcut they had chosen, a narrow track that cut straight through Lakota territory, carried a danger they had tried to ignore. They were not soldiers. Most were farmers, former miners, drifters, and tradesmen who had left behind families they hoped to return to with pockets full of gold. They moved through the country with the rattling confidence of men who had survived hardship before, but the older hands in the group sensed something different here. The Powder River country was quiet in a way that made their skin tighten. No bird song at dawn, no distant crack of timber, just an open stretch of earth that felt watched. The first sign came before the camp was fully awake. One of the horses jerked against its tether and bolted toward the creek, ears pinned back, eyes wide. Henry Sutton chased after it, grumbling about losing the only decent pack animal he had. When he reached the bank, he stopped short. Across the ridge, outlined against the rising sun, sat a row of mounted Lakota warriors. They were motionless, watching. The early light painted their silhouettes in sharp relief, and Sutton felt the air go out of his chest. A moment later, another group appeared on the opposite ridge. He turned to shout a warning, but the attack had already begun. Arrows snapped through the camp as prospectors scrambled for their rifles. Bedrolls and tin cups flew as men dropped to the ground, crawling behind saddles and overturned wagons. A tent pole collapsed under a volley, knocking 2 men flat. The warriors swept down the ridge in disciplined waves, firing from horseback with deadly accuracy. Their ponies leapt over rocks and sagebrush, closing the distance in seconds. Gunfire answered from the creekside, but the prospectors' shots were scattered and frantic. The terrain left them cornered. The creek curved tightly around their position, hemming them in on one side while a steep rise boxed them in on the other. There was no clean escape. The Lakota used the ridges like a funnel, driving the prospectors into the narrowest part of the bend. Smoke from black powder drifted low and thick, stinging eyes and mixing with the fog rising from the water. For many of the men, it was the first time they had seen warriors firing at full speed while leaning off the sides of their ponies, using the animals' bodies as shields with practiced fluidity. Thomas Greeley, a former Union soldier who had fought through the Wilderness Campaign, took charge. He shouted for the men to tighten their perimeter, to drag the wounded behind a fallen cottonwood and stack saddlebags for cover. Under his direction, the prospectors formed a rough semicircle. They fired in controlled bursts, aiming for riders who slowed to reload or dismounted to take position behind rocks. But the Lakota had numbers on their side. Some accounts later suggested more than 200 warriors, and they rotated their lines with precision, keeping pressure constant. The sun climbed higher, revealing more details of the battlefield. The creek glittered with reflected gunfire. Powder smoke hovered above the ground like low fog. A wounded prospector lay half-submerged at the water's edge, his coat turning dark as the current pulled around him. Another man, shot through the hand, tried to reload by bracing his rifle against a rock, swearing through clenched teeth. Arrows struck the cottonwood, quivering inches from men crouched behind it. The warriors rode past in tight arcs, shouting commands in Lakota, coordinating attacks from multiple angles. Their war cries echoed off the ridges, rising and falling like a drumbeat. One rider closed to within 20 yards, firing 3 shots in rapid succession before wheeling his pony around and disappearing behind the rise. The prospectors could tell the warriors were testing their defenses. searching for any weakness that would break the line. By mid-morning, ammunition was running dangerously low. Many of the men had started the journey with only a handful of cartridges, believing they would use them on game, not a battle. Their horses, terrified by the noise, had broken free or been struck down early in the fight. Without mounts, there was no chance of outrunning their attackers. The Lakota tightened the ring, moving in closer and firing from prone positions. The prospectors tried twice to push toward a drainage that led toward the timberline, but each attempt was cut down before they reached open ground. The turning point came unexpectedly. A Lakota leader on a spotted pony rode forward, calling out commands and signaling a coordinated push. He galloped straight toward the center of the prospectors' line, raising his rifle. Several prospectors fired at once. The pony collapsed, sending the rider tumbling onto the rocks. The sudden fall disrupted the timing of the charge, creating a brief opening. Greeley seized the moment, yelling for the men to concentrate their fire on the warriors nearest the creek. The barrage was enough to stall the push, forcing the attackers to pull back and regroup. It wasn't a victory, but it bought minutes the prospectors desperately needed. The sun now beat down from high overhead, illuminating the wreckage of the camp. Spent brass glinted in the dirt. Blood soaked into the dust. The bodies of men and horses lay scattered near the creek. The prospectors were exhausted, dehydrated, and nearly out of ammunition. Some clutched empty rifles like clubs. Others tore strips of cloth from shirts to bind wounds. Then, as abruptly as it began, the firing tapered off. Warriors on the ridges signaled to one another. Slowly, deliberately, they pulled away from the creek, riding back toward the high ground. A few remained to watch from a distance, ensuring the prospectors didn't attempt to follow. The message was unmistakable. They had shown their strength, and they had no intention of allowing trespassers deeper into the Powder River country. The surviving prospectors gathered the wounded and counted their dead. Several men had been killed outright, and others were barely conscious. With their horses gone and their supplies ruined, they faced a long, painful walk back toward the foothills. They fashioned stretchers from saplings and torn canvas, lifting the injured as carefully as their shaking arms allowed. The once hopeful expedition had become a shattered column limping across open ground, leaving behind a camp scarred by fire and battle. Word of the fight at Blacktail Deer Creek soon reached the gold camps and frontier towns. Newspapers inflated the numbers, but even the most sensational accounts couldn't hide the truth. The prospectors had walked into contested land, defended by people who had every reason to fight for it. For the Lakota communities, it was another stand in a long effort to push back against the encroachment that grew year after year. For the survivors, it became a memory etched into their lives, a day when everything they thought they understood about danger changed in a matter of hours. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.